Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be taking a look at the multi-timbral capabilities of Halion Sonic SE and indeed its big brother Halion Sonic. Now they're both the same for the purposes of what we're looking at today. I'll probably refer to it just as Halion Sonic rather than Halion Sonic SE3, etc., just for a bit of brevity. Now what is multi-timbral? Multi obviously means more than one, and timbral is referring to timbres or sounds. So it means that Halion Sonic can produce multiple sounds at the same time. This is a case with quite a few synths, and often it's 16 that they produce. This is to do with how many channels there are in a MIDI data stream, and that's to do with binary. So you can look that up. There's a bit of information about that in my book if you want to see that, but generally, all you need to know is you can have 16 different channels. So let's have a look at how we set that up in practice. So here we are with a Halion Sonic setup, and as you can see, we have slot 1 already highlighted, and I can load up a piano as you've seen previously. So I'm just going to put a piano on there. Now, if I play some notes on my keyboard, we can see some things are happening. So obviously you can hear it, but importantly, we can see it's playing on channel 1. We see this one light up as I play. So far, so good, right? If you want to just add some more sounds, you can just keep adding Halion Sonics. And yes, you definitely can do that, but only up to a point. The main reason being, at some point, you'll end up with too much load on the system, probably in terms of memory. So each Halion Sonic that you load up, which just has one sound in, has a lot more overhead because it's got effectively a whole synth engine running. Whereas if you use it in multi-timbral mode, you've got that one synth engine catering for those 16 sounds, so it can use less memory. Let's look at a quick demo. So here you can see there are 32 instances of Halion Sonic. Now I'm going to play it, but you're not going to hear it because it's just a noise. I've not done anything particularly interesting, but we've got 32 of them running. Now, if we look at Activity Monitor on the Mac and look at our memory use, we can see that Cubase is using 2.4 gigs of RAM. Now, while that's not a problem in itself on this particular project, you can hear that my Mac's fan is spooling up. It's getting a bit overheated already, and we're using a significant amount of memory. And if I had some other plugins which use large sample sets, we could actually run out of memory on the machine, and then we'll start having problems with performance. Now here you can see exactly the same setup in terms of the sounds that are being played, but these is just being played on two Halion Sonics. So we've got Halion Sonic 1 there, and Halion Sonic 2, and the rest of these are being fed as MIDI tracks which feed into those Halion Sonics. And if we look at the Halion Sonic in question, we can see we've got 16 different sounds loaded up, and when I play it, although we won't hear them, we can see that all 16 are being used. Now you may or may not be able to hear in the background, but the Mac's fan has spun down considerably. It's a little bit happier, and the memory load is about a gigabyte less. So we're using significantly less memory for this. So I appreciate this is not the most scientific of tests, but it's definitely been borne out in my experience. If you use Halion Sonics individually as instrument tracks, you've got a higher system load, both in terms of processing power and memory use, which means that ultimately you'll run out of steam sooner rather than later. This will clearly vary depending on the system that you've got. Obviously, if you've got a big, powerful desktop DAW, it's going to be completely different than if you've got some lightweight laptop, but it still holds out either way. You'll get more out of your system if you use them in multi-timbral mode. So let's take a look at how we actually do this in practice. So here you can see the setup as previously. So we have our channel 1 with our piano sound on there, and that's set up just as a regular instrument track, so we don't need to use it as a rack instrument. This allows us to extend an instrument track and it to take multiple MIDI channels. What we need to do is to add a MIDI track which is going to access channel 2, and the way to do that is to right click or two finger tap where we are in the track list and then go to add MIDI track. I'm going to call it bass because that's the instrument I'm going to add, and click add track. And now intelligently Cubase has picked Halion Sonic and chosen the next channel. So if we needed to do that manually or Cubase didn't do it for you, then you would make sure you pick the instrument track in question, which is here, Halion Sonic SE, MIDI, and then pick the next available channel. So when I play on my keyboard, you will see number 2 will light up because we're sending it to the Halion Sonic and we've got it on channel 2. If I wanted it to be on channel 8, all I'd need to do is to pick channel 8, and there we go. You can see 8 is lighting up. So let's go back to channel 2. Let's pick a sound because at the moment slot 2 is empty and nothing's happening. So let's just pick a bass, as that's what we decided to do. So we'll go to bass. I'm just going to pick GM acoustic bass, nice and straightforward. And there you can hear that. Now, what you'll see on the meters can be slightly confusing initially. The reason being is this meter here shows the MIDI, which is being passed through the channel. And then this is showing the audio, which is coming out of Halion Sonic, because Halion Sonic is taking that MIDI information in on channel 2 and then turning it to audio. So that's the process. We can do this multiple times. So let's add another one. So let's add another MIDI track. In this case, I'm going to call it Synth Strings. And it's put it on channel 3. It's selected channel 3 here. So there's some intelligence in this. It didn't always used to be this helpful, but it certainly is now. But say if it doesn't do this automatically, just pick the Halion Sonic there, pick the next available channel. And then now we can pick, in this case, strings. I'm just going to pick GM Synth Strings because, again, straightforward. And again, we can see that MIDI information on this meter and the audio on there. So that's the basis of multi-timbral use with Halion Sonic. You just pick each slot, pick the sound that you want on it, and then send MIDI to it. However, this does give us some limitations. And that's because all of the audio is coming out of the same output. We've just got a one stereo out. So now we're going to look at how you can get multiple outputs to allow you to mix in the way that you would do normally if you had multiple synths running. So here we are back in Cubase, and if we show the automation for this Halion Sonic instrument, we see the volume here, and we could add automation, etc. But this is where our outputs will appear once we turn them on. So there's 2 things we need to do here. Firstly, we need to turn those outputs on in Cubase. And secondly, we need to route the sounds from inside Halion Sonic to those outputs. Let's take them one step at a time. Firstly, turning on the outputs in Cubase. There's a couple of places we can do this, but the easiest one is in the inspector, and it's actually hidden on this tiny little button here where if you hover over that, it says activate outputs, and we click that, and here you can see there are all the possible outputs out of Halion. So it has actually got 16 stereo outputs. So we're just going to turn on the second one at the moment, rather than turning on all of them and it suddenly being this bewildering list of outputs. So just by turning on that one there, we can see something happens pretty quickly. And instead of the automation tracks we had before, we can now see we've got output 1 and output 2 here. And each one of those has its own automation we can deal with. So we've got output 1, which has got automation, and output 2, which has got its own separate automation. But if we go back to playing bass, we'll see it's still coming out of output 1. So that's what we need to change. Now, with all of these things, the change is made inside the synth. So in the case of Halion Sonic, it's on mix. So I'm going to click the mix page, and it's the output column here. So we've got all of these at the moment are set to main. So we want to change our acoustic bass, which is on number 2. Change that to go out of output 2. We can just click there, change it to output 2. And now when we play, we can see it's coming out of output 2, whereas the synth strings are still coming out of output 1. Looking in the mixer, we can see we've now got 2 outputs here, which are audio outputs that we can program individually. And probably the best thing to do here is to rename them. So I'm just going to call that bass. And now wherever we see that, it's referred to as bass. You might want to call it bass output if you find that a little bit confusing, but now we've got those individually. So now our output is going out of the bass output channel. If we want to edit this, we can click the E here, but the problem we've seen is that we change our channel we're on, and now when I play, because I've got effectively this Halion Sonic here selected, I'm not on that bass. So there's two ways you can get around that. Either you can turn monitor on, which gives us both piano and bass, so that's not a great solution. Or we can tell Cubase that its audio output has changed. The reason we have to do this is because Cubase has no way of looking inside the plugin to say, channel 2 comes out of output 2, so we need to help it. So this is the next step, and this will make editing much, much easier. So back on our inspector, we're going to click on bass. So here we are at the bass here, and you can see the output is in this section of the inspector. If you're not seeing that, it's probably because this section isn't highlighted. So we're just going to highlight that by opening that, and then we've got output Halion Sonic SE1. Click here. We're going to change it to bass output. So now when we play this, we're getting the right sound. It's coming out of the right output, but the problem we've got is that when we want to edit it, we end up with the MIDI going to the wrong track. Now, this will be fine if you're playing MIDI from a recorded track, but if you want to play it live, your input will change. So we're going to look at those two situations. Here we have a bass part which is playing, so we can click the E and get that open, or we can click this E here. Either way, that will open it up, and now we can apply some processing, etc. So you get the idea. Now that, most of the time, that's going to be fine. But if you want to access it while you're just playing around with the sound, you have a problem. Let's see what it is. So here we have the bass being played. And if I want to click the E here or here, the same thing happens. I click this E and we go back to piano. Now, the reason for that is that now the original Halion Sonic instrument track is selected because I've got a track in there. Exactly the same happens. So if I click this E here, same thing, same effect. It's a bit annoying. Is there a way around it? Yeah, there is, but it's not immediately apparent. So let's take a look at it. So the way around it is to click the E at the top of the inspector, which is to edit channel settings for the MIDI channel, which is much more sparse than the audio one, as you can imagine. But the important key is this button here, which is show output change. So that shows you where our output is going. So in other words, it shows us the output of the VST instrument and then also the stereo out. So click that button, and as we can see, we now have two extra channels we can look at. Bass output here, and indeed the master output as well. So this is often a useful way to get to where a particular channel is going out of. And if we click the E here, we can play the bass. And now you can see this can be edited in real time. So we can play around with these, and we're not changing the MIDI channel that we're monitoring on. So that's probably the most tricky part of the whole process, is being able to live audition MIDI while you're adjusting the audio as you play it. But if you can do that, you can do everything else to do with this. If you need to add more channels, it's just a case of turning on more outputs in the inspector and then assigning where those outputs come from inside Halion Sonic. But what about saving what we've done? Well, obviously, these will be saved with your project. Let's say you have a standard set of instruments that you want to use across multiple projects for consistency and ease of use. Can you save those? Yeah, you can. Let's take a look. So here we are in Halion Sonic, and we've got this setup we've seen pretty much before. We've got main, out 2 and out 3 assigned, and our 3 sounds: piano, bass, and synth strings. We could have made other settings, but for the time being, we'll just leave it as it is. If we want to save these, we can just click on the floppy disk here, Save Multi-Program. So I'm just going to give it a name: piano, bass, strings. And then save that. And if I want to recall that, I can just click here, and we can see this is the only one I've got set up at the moment. So let's see what gets reloaded when you load this up on a blank Halion Sonic. So here we are in a new project, and I'm going to load that multi-program as seen before, piano, bass, strings. If we look in the mix section, we can see that main, out 2 and out 3 have got loaded up. But if we expand the outputs, we can see they've not been turned on. So we'd need to turn those on manually. But other than that, everything else is saved. The hard work of assigning them, particularly if there's 16, has been done. And if you need to turn on all 16, you can just click all outputs. And then all 16 outputs will be turned on and ready to go. MIDI files have been much derided over the years by people, but I think they are a fantastic and useful resource. They are near universal. Nearly every DAW can export and import MIDI files, which means it's possible to communicate with people who are using different systems. And probably more importantly than that, it gives you access to an absolutely enormous library of music, which you can just import and manipulate from within Cubase. Whether it's classical music, which has been out of copyright for years, or people's transcription of jazz standards, backing tracks, pop songs, or just chords to play around with, you can pretty quickly get music into the sequencer that then you can start playing around with and making your own. Let's look at importing a MIDI file using Cubase and Halion Sonic SE. So here we are in Cubase, and if you didn't know, it's under Import and then MIDI file. We're going to pick Flourish, which is a MIDI file which is included with Windows, and it's got a full range of instruments in it. All you have to do is pick a folder to put it in. I'm just going to put it in the same folder as all my other projects to do with Halion Sonic. And there it is. So as you can see, we've got 16 tracks with a variety of MIDI information in there. Cubase has loaded this up with the default setting of one Halion Sonic. And if we open it up, we will see all of the programs which have been selected. So you can see these are all general MIDI programs. And if we play, I'm just going to play a quick bit of the song. You can see all of these tracks start playing, etc. So there's a whole load of music which has been programmed in here. But how did these get here? And can this be a problem? Well, the answer to the first question is how did these get here is that each of these tracks includes some program change information. So I'm going to close Halion Sonic, and then we're just going to look at this first track here. Now, if you open it up in the key editor, which is typically done by double clicking, you're not going to see that much. You'll see the notes, which is generally what you're after. And if we click velocity, we can see we've got some pitch bend, etc. in there and so on. But importantly in here, we've also got program change. Okay, it's not generally that useful to look at it in the key editor, so we're going to look at it in the list editor. So under MIDI, I'm going to open up the list editor and then scroll to the top, which is where the beginning of the track is, and we can see we've got some things happen. Now this typically will happen in most MIDI files. So we've got a program change, so that is what is picking this particular sound. And if we go back to Halion Sonic, we will see that it is indeed number 90 is pad 2 warm. If we reopen that, we can also see there is some controller data. Now, we're not going to go through all of this, but this basically resets this to the volume, pan, etc., which is desired for this. So that block of information at the beginning of the track resets it to a sane starting point for the rest of the song to proceed from. Gives us some sane defaults, or maybe sets it to whatever the composer wants. That's normally fine, unless you want to change it. And if you do want to change it, you can have a problem, as we're going to see now. Okay, so here we can see in Halion Sonic, we've got track 2, which is on MIDI channel 1. And if we open that up in Halion Sonic, it's on pad 2 warm. Which of course goes back to our program change as we saw in the last section. But if we decide to change that, let's say you change it to pad 3 polysynth. If I play that back and you look at what happens on screen, we can see it's changed. Okay, so that information will get changed. So there may be situations where this doesn't happen, but often it will happen if you pick another general MIDI sound, which quite often people do, but also it can sometimes happen with Halion Sonic sounds as well. The way to deal with it is as follows. So once you've got your program set up, initially you can go into the list editor, find the program change in question. So in this case, it's program change 90, and then I'm going to delete that. I'm going to leave the others intact because I think they're pretty sane. But with that now deleted, I can now change this to a different sound. So let's change that to polysynth as I chose before. And now when we play the track back, you can see it hasn't changed. So now it's over. So if you get a situation with Halion Sonic where you've imported a MIDI file and it feels like there's a ghost in the machine because the sound keeps changing back to what it was originally, the list editor at the beginning of the part or track in question is the place to look. Sometimes you'll find MIDI tracks where the program changes are embedded at a certain part in the track. So maybe they didn't have enough channels to put everything in, and one channel will change from one instrument to another partway through, and you won't get this problem until bar 57. Again, just a quick look for a program change. Typically that will find that out. And because you're working with Cubase now, you've got more than 16 channels available. You'll just be able to create another Halion Sonic, put that sound on there as a separate track, which never needs to change. Program changes were really useful back in the day, particularly when you were limited in terms of hardware, but now they're much less common. And when people come across them, it can be a bit confusing because a lot of people will never have actually used a program change. They merely have picked the sound using the selector, whether it's in the synth or if it's in the inspector. So that's a look at Halion Sonic's multi-timbral abilities. So you've seen how to use it to generate multiple synth sounds using separate MIDI channels, and also how to use multiple outputs to send those sounds individually to Cubase for mixing. We've also taken a look at importing MIDI files and some of the pitfalls you can find there. As ever, if you found this useful, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again for more Music Tech Tuition.